My name is Arumugam Mantiram. I am a professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering and the Makita Department of Chemical Engineering. I am also the director of the Texas Materials Institute and the Material Science and Engineering program at the University of Texas at Austin. My presentation is focused on clean energy for a cleaner tomorrow. Energy is a central societal issue impacting our way of life, economy, national security, environment, and public health. The chart here shows the world energy consumption as we move along. As you see here, the energy use globally is skyrocketing. Also, the energy is predominantly coming from fossil fuel. And that has two consequences. First, the energy use is going to triple by the year 2100 based on moderate economic and population growth. So the fossil fuel is finite, so we may not be able to sustain with fossil fuel as the energy demand goes up. The second issue is using fossil fuels create a lot of air pollution which causes public health problems. Also, carbon dioxide emission and other emissions that lead to global warming and climate change. So what is the solution? The solution is renewable energy like solar and wind energies, because it is widely available all over the world, but they are intermittent. For example, wind comes when it wants to come, and we get solar energy during the day, and we don't get it during the night, and there may be cloudy days, so we may not get any solar energy. Because they are intermittent, we have to find a way to store the electricity produced from solar and wind energy in an economical and efficient manner and utilize it. For that, the most probable option is battery technologies. However, there are issues with battery technologies. I'll talk about it in the next slide. Before that, in the United States, nearly 1/3 of the energy is consumed by transportation. We have a lot of cars on the road, so we consume a lot of energy for transportation. And with transportation, there is no control on the emission, so there is uncontrolled pollution. As we drive, the pollutants are emitted everywhere. And for transportation, the most viable near-term option is again battery technologies. So there are a lot of battery technologies. So I take here lithium-ion batteries as an example to show you how it works. In a battery, for example, you will have a negative electrode that is called anode and a positive electrode that will be called as cathode. They are separated by an electrolyte that will conduct only charge in the form of ions. It should not conduct any electron internally between the two electrodes. So during charge, for example, in a lithium-ion cell, the lithium ions will move internally from the cathode to the anode, while the electron flows externally. During discharge, exactly the opposite will happen. As you see here, lithium will move from anode to cathode, and the electrons will also move from anode to cathode, so charge is neutralized. During that process, we also take out electron from the cathode and put it into the anode during charge, and during discharge, exactly the opposite will happen. So the user time, when I charge a battery how long I can use it before I have to recharge it is called as energy density. How much energy you can store in a given volume or given weight. And that depends on two parameters. The first parameter is the voltage we get per cell, and that is related to the difference in energy between the cathode and the anode. So you have to keep this as low as possible and the anode energy as high as possible. However, these two energies have to lie within the band gap or the energy levels in the electrolyte. Otherwise, the electrons, instead of going through the external circuit, as you see here, it may go internally, and that will cause problem. The battery cannot be sustainably used. The other parameter is the amount of charge we can store per unit weight or per unit volume of these materials in the form of lithium ions in a lithium ion battery. So currently the lithium ion batteries use graphite as an anode or negative electrode and an oxide called lithium cobalt oxide as the cathode, and the lithium ions are shuttling back and forth during charge and discharge. The next question is, why are we so interested in lithium ion batteries for our cell phone, laptop, as well as electric vehicles, as opposed to, for example, lead acid batteries, which we have in each car for starting, for example, or nickel cadmium or nickel metal hydride. Instead of using these, why do we really want to use lithium ion batteries? The reason is lithium ion batteries give much higher energy density. They can store more energy in a given weight or in a given volume compared to the other batteries. Why that is? In the case of lead acid or nickel cadmium or nickel metal hydride, we use water-based electrolytes. When you have aqueous or water-based electrolytes, the separation between these two energy levels in the electrolyte will be smaller. So the difference between the anode energy and the cathode energy has to be kept small. So the voltage is mostly less than 2 volt in all these batteries. With lithium ion batteries, this is widened. So the cathode energy is as low as possible, anode energy is as high as possible. So the difference is large. So we can have 4 volt per cell instead of 2 volt. So you are going from 2 here versus 4. So the at least double the energy density based on just voltage alone. That's why we tend to use lithium ion batteries for most of the portable applications and electric vehicles. So although it looks very simple, when you design a battery, you have to consider a lot of different aspects. For example, how much energy I can store in a given volume or weight, how fast I can charge and discharge the battery, how long I can use it before I have to replace it, would I have any safety issues, fire hazards, and things like that, the materials I use or the process I use to produce them, are they going to have environmental consequences? And finally, what is the cost? Cost is not just materials alone, but all of these will contribute to the cost. For example, if I store more energy in a given battery, I may have to make 50 cells instead of 100 cells. So that saves money. In addition to that, we want these batteries to operate at low temperatures as well as higher temperatures. And we always want to charge the battery as fast as possible. However, all these parameters depend upon the chemistry and physics of the materials we use in making the batteries. What kind of structure they have in which the atoms are arranged and how their energy levels look, as I explained earlier, all those influence, and they are strictly controlled by the nature of the materials we use. Among these parameters, which I have to consider more, or there are a bunch of battery technologies, and which battery I have to use really depends upon the application. For example, for cell phones and laptops, we are mostly interested in the energy density or how long I can use it before I have to charge it. When we go to electric vehicle, the energy density or driving distance is still important, but it is a larger battery than cell phone or laptop battery. Therefore, cost also becomes important. Safety also becomes important because we don't want to have any safety issues when the car is on the road. Grid storage, on the other hand, the energy density is not a very critical parameter because we have a lot of land in which we can install the batteries, but this will be very, very large battery. So cost is the most important. We don't want to replace it often. So reliability, life, and safety, all those becomes critical. You see here, one kind of battery may not fit for all kinds of application. That's why all kinds of different battery technologies are pursued. Lithium ion is one. Instead of lithium as the moving ion, if you have sodium, that will be called as sodium ion. Then if you have these ions moving, they are zinc ion or magnesium ion or aluminum ion batteries. If you use sulfur as an electrode, metal sulfur batteries, instead of using liquid electrolytes, if you use solid electrolyte, that will be called as all solid state batteries. If you use liquid chemicals instead of solid electrodes, that will be called as redox flow batteries. So all kinds of batteries you can think of, but when you choose a battery, you have to consider these parameters, all of these parameters, and then what is more important for the application I'm going to look into. So right now, let's take lithium-ion batteries. The lithium-ion battery, there are several components in which 50% of the cost is coming from the cathode. That's the most expensive. And that also limits the energy density or usage time. In the cathode, a lot of metal ions are involved. In the metal ions, cobalt is the most expensive and least abundant. Right now, the lithium-ion batteries use significant amount of cobalt, and there is a lot of concern that as we use more electric vehicles, the cobalt price will go up and the technology may have sustainability issues. So in our lab at UT, for the past year, we have been making series of materials in which we have 5% of cobalt, and in this particular one, NMA, formula is written here. We have 90% nickel, 5% manganese, and 5% aluminum. There is no cobalt. It's a cobalt-free material, and the performance of that material is not inferior to some of the cobalt-containing material. So we have been successful to eliminate the most expensive and least abundant cobalt from these lithium-ion batteries. So even though it looks simple, it involves a lot of chemistry, physics, materials engineering, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, a lot of different aspects. First, we have designed the composition based on basic chemistry and physics. Then we have to make them, scale them up in the lab. In our lab, we can make consistently materials like this, in which each individual particle has a shape like this. That's about 10 micron size. So that's one big aspect. Not every lab can make this. We have worked hard on this for about 5 years now to perfect it. So we can make material as good as any commercial company in Asia or in the US. Most of these are made actually in Asia, Japan, South Korea, or China. So we can make better than or as good as they can make. Then when these materials are operated in the battery, they can undergo a lot of changes because you are repeatedly charging and discharging. Something can dissolve from one electrode, go through the liquid electrolyte into the other electrode, and then poison that. And we need good analytical techniques to characterize them before making battery as well as after cycling the battery for thousands of cycles. Fortunately, a big university like the University of Texas at Austin, we have a lot of sophisticated millions of dollars worth equipment. They can do images of atoms. When you make these batteries after cycling, are they all arranged in the form of a layer as you see here, or their surface has been attacked, so they transform to something else. So you can find that out. See, in this material, the surface is very little attack on the surface, whereas in that material, it is attacked to a larger extent. So you understand, and then here we can also use something called time of flight secondary ion mass spectroscopy. We can do mapping, so we can find out which metal ions are here, to what thickness they are there, what do they do, what kind of species they form. All those we can find out. Why it is necessary? If we understand during operation what is happening, we will be continuously making improvement in the performance, lifetime, the amount of energy stored, the safety characteristics, all those we can make it better and better. And that is the kind of research we do at UT Austin. So far, I talked about batteries in which we use cathodes that contain metal ions like cobalt, manganese, or nickel, or other things. But those metals also have their own abundance. Some of them are available abundantly. Some of them are rare, like cobalt has low abundance. So there is a lot of interest to get rid of the metal containing compounds and replace them with something like sulfur. So sulfur is a byproduct in the petrochemical industry. For example, there are a lot of petrochemical industries, gas companies in Houston. They produce a lot of sulfur as a byproduct. They really want to get rid of that waste. So if you can get that waste as a free material and make use of it in the battery, you save a lot of money. Also, that technology will be more sustainable because you are not depending upon mining. In addition to that, sulfur stores 10 times more charge than the other materials I talked about. Sulfur can, for example, store theoretically 1600 amp hour per kilogram, whereas the material I showed you earlier, cobalt containing or other materials, they store less than 200 amp hour per kilogram. But nothing comes easy. Sulfur has its own problem. Sulfur is a poor electronic conductor, ionic conductor. Therefore, the utilization becomes low. So even though theoretically you can have this much capacity stored, practical capacity will be pathetically 1/5 or 1/3 or even sometimes half, depending upon how you make the cell. Also during operation, these rings break, you form chains like this, and these migrate from the sulfur electrode through the separator, liquid electrolyte, into the lithium metal anode, and that causes a lot of headache. Because sulfur does not contain any lithium, you have also lithium metal here that has its own safety problem as well as reversible deposition problem. They form dendrite or massive structure, lot of issues. So we have developed a good understanding of the factors they are influencing as well as what we really need to do to have practically high energy density that can beat or at least match the other lithium-ion batteries. Using very low amount of electrolyte, high amount of sulfur loading, low lithium or no lithium here, and making larger cells instead of small tiny cells, we have been making a lot of progress to make this as a next generation practically viable, commercially viable technology. So far I talked about batteries, but batteries are energy storage devices because you have to have electricity somewhere to charge the battery. During that time, you store electrical energy as chemical energy in your battery. And when you use your cell phone or laptop, that stored energy is used as electrical energy. So that is an intermediate device. Battery uses the electricity produced with solar or wind, or for example, through the outlet in our house, we charge the battery and then we use it in the car or cell phone or laptop. So you have to produce energy somewhere by some means. Fuel cells, on the other hand, are energy conversion device. Fuel cell will also have an anode and a cathode. But in the anode, you feed hydrogen gas from a tank. In the cathode, you can either feed air or oxygen gas. And again, during operation, hydrogen, for example, is oxidized to produce H plus ion, electron comes here, protons come here, and those electrons reduce the oxygen molecules to oxide ions, and those oxide ions combine with the electrons, with the protons moving here, and they form water. So ideally, if you use hydrogen fuel and air or oxygen, your product is just water and you get energy. That's all it does. No pollution, nothing. And as long as you supply hydrogen and air, you will be continuously getting energy, unlike the batteries. Batteries, when the charge is over, you have to find an outlet. Here, as long as you have the hydrogen tank somewhere, you can get energy. You do not have to use just hydrogen gas. This could, in principle, work with a liquid fuel like methanol or ethanol, but fuel cells also have too many challenges. For doing this reaction, you have an expensive catalyst like platinum. That's very expensive. Also, hydrogen fuel cell is the easiest, less problematic. If you use methanol or ethanol, you have to have more problems. So in fact, fuel cells have more problems from a cost point of view or other considerations than the batteries. One important thing is the fuel cells can be used to replace batteries, for example, for the soldier power, unmanned aerial vehicles, and things like that. The modern technologies have given a lot of capabilities to our soldiers, but it comes with a severe penalty. What is the penalty? Increase in battery weight. The more technologies they get, the more capability they get, the more battery, more energy they have to carry. If you replace the battery with a fuel cell powered by methanol fuel rather than hydrogen, you can reduce the weight by 65% for a 72-hour mission. So instead of using a lithium-ion battery, your soldiers use methanol powered fuel cells. They have to carry much less weight compared to the energy source that is provided by batteries. Also, fuel cells, like I pointed out, they do not need electrical outlet. In addition to that, for defense purposes, they can make the logistics and operations much easier and more efficient because they do not have to carry heavy batteries all the time with them. As long as they can get the fuel from the other vehicles available or other sources, they can get the power they need. So overall, the conclusion is rapid depletion of fossil fuels and growing environmental concerns. These are the two issues. Demand the society to develop alternative, sustainable, clean energy technologies. For example, based on solar or wind energies, produce electricity, store in the battery, then you utilize it. But all of them are having challenges, although they are very appealing to overcome these two problems. The challenges are cost, efficiency, durability or life. Some of them may have safety issues. how much energy I can get in a given volume or given size or given weight. And that hamper their widespread commercialization. All of these factors or parameters are linked to severe material challenges. The material we use to make the fuel cell or solar cell or batteries, they control all these parameters. I would say materials are the bottleneck for all of these clean energy technologies. So to start with, the students here, the children here, you may be learning in your school chemistry and physics. So that's the starting point. It starts with chemistry and physics. With good chemistry and physics, you can design the right materials and they can lead to engineering product. That means good solar cells, good fuel cells, good batteries with all these parameters in a desirable manner. So physics and chemistry, materials physics and chemistry has a profound role to play in overcoming the materials bottleneck. And that materials research involves designing materials based on basic chemistry and physics, lot of novel chemical synthesis, advanced characterization of the material synthesized using sophisticated equipment that are millions of dollars of worth, and they are available at the universities or national labs, and then building prototype devices like batteries or fuel cells using these materials, evaluating their performance, and then develop a good fundamental basic science understanding of their structure, how the atoms are arranged, what is their chemical composition, what kind of property we get from them, what kind of performance we get from them, connect all the dots to establish and develop a good understanding. So these are the kind of research the students and postdoctoral researchers working in our lab will be doing. That's how they will write their dissertation or thesis to get their degree. So it's not just making these materials and publishing or creating technology so that the society can use. There is another important factor or issue aspect involved here. When we do all these research, we also develop well-trained workforce that can globally compete in the 21st century so that we can maintain American competitiveness or American superiority. So workforce development is very critical so that people know how to design, how to make, how to assemble batteries, how to take care of them, how to do the engineering, how the chemistry and physics control them. All those we have to have by having good workforce as we move forward. So finally, I would like to thank my current group. These are all the people, PhD students and some postdocs working in my group. They all do excellent work. So my current group, as well as about 265 people who have worked in my laboratory during the past 30 plus years. They are all over the world. Many of them are, 52 of them are professors all over the world. And some of them work in leading companies like Tesla, Apple, Samsung, LG Chem. They're all over the world. So I'm very, very grateful to all of them for doing a lot of wonderful work over the years to make my stay at the University of Texas at Austin enjoyable. Finally, last but not least, I'm very grateful to the United States Department of Energy for continuously providing support, as well as other funding agencies, National Science Foundation, US Army, NASA, ExxonMobil, Samsung, Tesla, Welch Foundation, and the Energy Institute at UT Austin. I'm grateful to all the funding agencies for supporting our research so that the students and postdocs working or doing research can be financially supported and we can buy all the chemicals as well as equipment necessary to do the work. Thank you very much.
In the first of the two demonstrations, we are going to inspect the components of a fuel cell. The system selected for this demonstration is an aluminum air fuel cell, in which, unlike the hydrogen air fuel cell, the fuel is an aluminum metal. The fuel cell can be built with an aluminum foil, a nickel foam, or any other porous conductive medium, and a piece of paper separator soaked with a solution of table salt in water. In this system, nickel foam is not involved in the overall electrochemical reaction and only serves as a substrate on top of which oxygen gas from the air can accept electrons from the aluminum metal. Therefore, any other conductive and porous substrate can be used as well, such as charcoal paper. The overall electrochemical reaction is oxidation of aluminum metal at the anode to aluminum cations, reduction of oxygen to oxide anions, and formation of aluminum oxide in the electrolyte. Note that as the oxygen cathode is gaseous and is virtually limitless, this fuel cell reaction is only limited by the amount of available aluminum metal. Thus, these cells can be built into very lightweight designs and can operate for a long time. The fuel cell can easily be assembled by stacking the separator and nickel foam on top of the aluminum anode and adding a few drops of the salt water electrolyte. As a fuel cell comprising an anode, a cathode, and the electrolyte has been assembled, a thermodynamic potential difference forms that is the source of the cell voltage. We can see that this cell generates a potential difference of roughly 650 millivolts. Due to the relatively small voltage that a single aluminum air fuel cell generates, a larger assembly of multiple individual cells needs to be put in series in order to make a battery. In this example, each cell's cathode is electrically connected to the adjacent cell anode to gradually increase the voltage. Here we have put 8 individual cells to make a battery with a nominal voltage of 4 volts. A useful battery should be able not to only generate a voltage, but also power, meaning to deliver an electric current at the generated voltage. To demonstrate this, we are going to power a white LED. For ease of visibility, the ambient lights have been turned off. By connecting the anode and cathodes of the battery to the LED, one can see that the LED is turned on. The electrons are circulated through the external circuit as a result of oxidation of aluminum and reduction of the oxygen from the air. As a second demonstration, we are going to have an inside look into a typical lithium-ion battery. The first step of making a battery is the synthesis of cathode. In a typical synthesis, nickel hydroxide is mixed with lithium hydroxide and fired at high temperatures in an oxygen furnace to get the dark powder lithium nickel oxide. During the reaction, nickel is oxidized from a 2-valent state to the 3-valent state, and due to the increased nickel-oxygen covalency, the powder gets dark. The prepared cathode powder is then mixed with conductive carbon and a liquid paste and cast onto an aluminum current collector as a thin film. After the drying, the positive electrodes are punched from the aluminum foil. Similarly, graphite powder is casted onto copper foil and punched in a similar way to form the anode. The two electrodes are separated from each other using an insulator polymer sheet separator, which can soak in the electrolyte. Note that unlike the aluminum air fuel cell, the voltage of a single lithium-ion cell is about 4 volts. Therefore, not only a water-based electrolyte should be avoided, but also the cell components needs to be protected from the ambient moisture and atmospheric gases that can undergo unwanted side reactions. In order to do this, the cell is enclosed and sealed in a protective pouch cell, such as the one shown here. Here, two individual cells are placed in series to generate a battery that can provide higher voltages for practical applications. Due to the much higher energy density of lithium-ion cells, only 2 cells are needed to make an 8-volt battery. Again, a useful battery should provide not only voltage, but also deliver a power. Here we are going to power up a small electronic circuit and display demanding 200 milliwatts power using the cells assembled in Professor Mentheron's lab. We hope you enjoyed watching the demonstration and thank you for attending this year's Explorer UT.